This one's on my little, unpacking and little epiphanies on the Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z franchise. This is where it's hilarious. You can't even accurately convey what it is in the English language because of just everybody's preconceived notions and what they get geared toward, what direction they, you know, spiral into. So, let me get going. I need to tell you about the time I realized one of the most influential hypermasculine franchises in history is built on a castration nobody talks about. I was a kid when Dragon Ball Z exploded. Every boy my age was obsessed. They'd reenact the fights at recess, scream Kamehameha in the halls, argue endlessly about power levels. But I watched a few episodes and hated it. Not because of the violence, but because something felt fundamentally wrong, like a betrayal I couldn't articulate yet. It would take me decades to fully understand what I was seeing. A franchise teaching millions of boys that to become powerful, you must first amputate the parts of yourselves that scare others. Act 1. The Tail as the Mythic Organ. Let's start with what was lost. In early Dragon Ball, Goku has a tail. Not as decoration, as a lived, trained, vulnerable part of his being. He strengthens it by training with monkeys. He uses it for balance and mobility. When opponents grab it, he's momentarily helpless. It connects him to the moon, triggering his transformation into the Uzaru, a giant ape of uncontrollable wild power. The tail represents everything that makes early Dragon Ball mythically interesting. Its embodied difference. He's not fully human. It's cyclical power, tied to lunar rhythms, not to will alone. It's relational vulnerability. It can be exploited, forcing him to adapt. It's dangerous potential that must be negotiated, not transcended. Early Goku's innocence works because it's relational. He learns through encounter. He can be confused, embarrassed, corrected. He belongs to a world that pushes back. This is a character learning to inhabit liminality, learning to live responsibly with wilderness, not eliminate it. The tail isn't just a quirk. It's the organ that forces Goku to remain in conversation with his environment and his own aminality. It's what makes his power ecological rather than abstract, cyclical rather than linear, embodied rather than purely mental. Act 2, the amputation. Then comes the transition that broke something fundamental. One episode, Goku is a child. Next episode, adult body, same child mind. The tail, gone. Removed off screen to restore the moon. As a child, I couldn't accept this. To me, these were ontologically different beings. The wild organ was gone. This was another thing wearing his name. The other boys didn't notice, or if they did, they were relieved. Because healthy mythic transitions require three phases: separation, loss and crisis, and exile. That's four. Liminal transformation, confusion and death symbolism and learning. Return with difference, genuinely changed embodiment and subjectivity. Dragon Ball skips phase 2 entirely. We don't get growth, we get arrested development armored with power. Adult Goku's innocence is no longer relational. It becomes asocial, unaccountable, power shielded. The story shifts from innocence as openness to innocence as exemption from responsibility. He doesn't need to understand, nurture, or integrate consequences. His goodness is assumed. His violence is excused. His absence is normalized. But here's what the franchise desperately needs you not to see. The tail wasn't removed because Goku outgrew it. It was removed because hypermasculine systems cannot tolerate integrated wildness. And there's something even more important. Goku never meaningfully consents to this removal. The world doesn't grieve it, there's no ritual acknowledgement of its loss. The message becomes chillingly clear. If your embodied difference makes the world uncomfortable, your responsibility is self-amputation, not asking whether the discomfort is justified. Act 3, the castration paradox. So here's the paradox at the molten core of of Dragon Ball Z. To achieve hypermasculinity, you must first be castrated. The tail removal functions as symbolic castration, not sexual but mythic. It represents the amputation of animality, wildness, uncontrollable surplus, nonlinear cyclical power, embodied vulnerability. What replaces it? Linear power ups you control through will, rage triggered transformation, scarcity-based competition, constant escalation. This is bureaucratic masculinity masquerading as mythic heroism. The castration functions as a credential, proof of discipline, proof of control, proof you're ready to enter the hierarchy. Only after amputating the part that connects you to the cyclical embodied relational power are you permitted to pursue linear, abstracted, will-driven force. This is why Dragon Ball Z's masculinity is always tense, always clenched. It's compensatory. It's masculinity after loss, not integrated wholeness. Where the tale once connected Goku to the moon, rhythm, and ecology, anger now connects him to hierarchy, escalation, and domination. That's not evolution, that's substitution after amputation. Look at the faces in Dragon Ball Z. Permanent scowls, clenched jaws, bodies perpetually braced for violence. This isn't just animation shortcuts. It's a theological statement about what manhood requires. Constant readiness to substitute rage for the lost organ of cyclical wild power. Act 4. The boys who couldn't metabolize. The other boys my age weren't unfazed by the discontinuity. They were invested in it. The tale represented everything they were already being trained to suppress: uncontrollable embodiment, vulnerability to environment, dependence on rhythms beyond their will, power that doesn't obey rage alone. When the tail was removed, they saw, good, the dangerous part is gone. The power is safe. Now power is safe. Dragon Ball Z taught them in sequence: first, become powerful by losing parts of yourself. Second, prove adulthood through controlled rage. Third, difference must be amputated before it can be respected. I watch boys around me withdraw into competitive isolation, imitating the clenched hero, never questioning why strength required emotional amputation. They couldn't metabolize sci-fi without resorting to imitation of the violent characters, because the franchise itself modeled growth through subtraction, not integration. As an agender child, I wasn't confused about continuity. I was detecting ontological rupture. I perceived that the protector of the world should have to learn to live responsibility with his tail, not to erase it for others' comfort. That perception wasn't queerness as identity, it was queerness as epistemic refusal, refusing to accept that maturation requires amputation. For children without relational scaffolding, Dragon Ball Z became a training regimen. Power without reflection, growth without grief, adulthood without responsibility, masculinity without care. And this translated directly into behavioral scripts: isolation as virtue, endurance as identity, emotional illiteracy as strength. Act 5. The woman disappeared. And then here's what's happened to the women. In early Dragon Ball, Bulma's femininity was epistemically active. She drives the plot. She engineers solutions. She's vain, scared, brilliant, horny, curious, fully human, and fully relevant. Her messiness, her vanity, her cleverness, her fear, all of it legitimate intelligence and agency. Watch what happens in the exact moment of Goku's transition. Bulma gets a shorter haircut. Her expressions flatten. Her agency shifts from catalytic to supportive. This isn't women becoming masculine in a queer, destabilizing sense. It's femininity being stripped of legitimacy. Dragon Ball Z women aren't masculized by gaining power. They're visually as simplified, bodies more anger, emotionally flattened, fewer expressions. Narratively demoted to maternal or supportive roles, given strength only as far as to not disturb the male hierarchy. The result is defeminization without liberation. In a world where only anger signifies power and calm is weakness, expressive emotional range, traditionally coded feminine, must be eliminated entirely. So women can't remain feminine or become fully powerful. They're neutralized into supporting geometry. This ties directly back to the tale. Once the franchise commits to anger as power, everything else becomes ornamental weakness. Playfulness, curiosity, emotional literacy, relational intelligence, all of it gets coded as irrelevant to the only thing that matters: combat escalation. The castration doesn't just reshape Goku, it restructures the entire narrative universe. When the wild organ that connected power to ecology gets amputated, feminine coded intelligence loses its epistemic legitimacy. What's valued is no longer relational negotiation but hierarchical domination. Act 5, GT's symptomatic return. And then comes Dragon Ball GT, the franchise's unconscious confession. GT does three things Dragon Ball Z spent hundreds of episodes denying. It reverts Goku to childhood. It restores the tail. It re-anchors power and animality rather than pure rage. This isn't nostalgia, it's symbolic backtracking. The franchise is implicitly saying something essential was lost, and escalation alone could not replace it. But watch how the tale comes back. It's not chosen, not trained, not integrated. Elder Kai forcibly extracts it from Goku's body like pulling a reluctant tooth. That's not restoration. That's instrumentalization of wilderness. If Dragon Ball Z's tail removal was castration to earn masculinity, GT's regrowth is a forced prosthesis. Wildness bolted back on because the castrated version proved insufficient. But prosthesis doesn't restore wholeness. They compensate for absence. Super Saiyan 4 looks mythic again. It's hairy. It's hairy, feral, visibly animal, but it's still subordinated to power scaling. It still exists to win fights. It doesn't re-ecologize Goku's relationship to his world. The tail returns to enable power-ups, not to restore cyclical embodied relational power. This exposes the deeper paradox. Hypermasculinity isn't self-sustaining. It accrues permanent debt to the very wilderness it castrates. The franchise loops endlessly. Amputate for control, regrow for power, lose again in the next transformation cycle. This mirrors real-world patriarchal masculinity perfectly. Subtract vulnerability to become a man. Spend a life compensating with rage and spectacle. Never grieve what was lost. Never integrate wholeness. GT proves that the original castration created a wound that the franchise cannot heal, only restage. Act 6, the civilizational wound. Let's be clear about what we're analyzing here. Dragon Ball Z is one of the most globally influential pieces of media in shaping contemporary masculinity. It taught entire generations of boys across cultures what strength looked like, what masculinity requires, what protection means. And the lesson underneath the power levels in planet-destroying fights was this. Growth requires amputation. Maturity means controlled deficiency. Masculinity is achieved through loss, then compensated with rage. Protection requires domination of both self and world. From a trans-dual feminist lens, we can map the franchise's collapse. From playful multiplicity to linear domination. From relational being to competitive being. From embodied difference to hierarchical extraction. From ecological power to engineered escalation. From gender-naive embodiment to hypermasculine extraction. The franchise doesn't teach boys to clench around absence. It teaches entire audiences that problems are solved by cutting parts off, not integrating them. Wildness must be domesticated or eliminated, never lived with. Difference is a pathology requiring correction. Emotional range is weakness. The world exists as a backdrop for domination, not as ecology to belong to. Look at how the world itself changes. Early Dragon Ball has villages, forests, deserts, oceans, a living, breathing planet with cultures and ecosystems. By Dragon Ball Z, fights happen in empty wastelands, barren planets, the voids of space. The environment becomes irrelevant except as something to destroy. That is not coincidence. That's the logical endpoint of power divorced from ecology. This pattern didn't end with Dragon Ball. It metastasized across the entire shonen genre, creating generation after generation of stories where power scaling replaces character development. Rage becomes the only legitimate emotion. Women are either prizes or supporting cast. Wildness is either either a monstrous enemy or extracted fuel. Maturity means emotional shutdown. Act 7. What could have been? Imagine a different transition. Imagine if the narrative between child and adult Goku actually showed him learning to live with his tail, the training to maintain consciousness during the Ozaru transformation, discovering how to access that cyclical wild power without losing himself. Imagine if becoming the world's protector meant learning to hold dangerous potentials responsibly, not eliminating them for others' comfort. Imagine if Bulma's engineering genius remained as narratively central as combative power, if relational intelligence, emotional literacy, and body vulnerability weren't systematically devalued. Imagine if anger wasn't the only emotion that could move the plot forward, if characters could be playful and powerful, vulnerable and strong, soft and protective all at once. Imagine if the franchise taught boys growth through integration, not amputation, strength that includes softness, power that remains relational, maturity that grieves what it transforms, masculinity that doesn't require castration as credential. This isn't nostalgia for what was. It's mourning for what could have been, and recognition for what millions of boys were taught instead. The tragedy isn't that an alternative existed in some perfect form. The tragedy is that early Dragon Ball had all the pieces for this integration and chose escalation instead. Closing. I titled this The Castration at the Heart of Dragon Ball Z because that's precisely what it is. Not metaphorically, not as academic overthinking, literally. The franchise's hypermasculine edifice is structurally founded on an unacknowledged, ungrieved amputation, framed as maturity but functioning as extraction. The tail had to go because it represented power that couldn't be governed by escalation hierarchies, power that was cyclical, ecological, embodied, vulnerable, relational. Corporate mythology cannot tolerate this, so it teaches boys to amputate it themselves, then spend their lives compensating with controlled rage, calling that compensation strength. As an agender child, I perceived the discontinuity between child and adult Goku because I hadn't yet been trained to accept amputation as natural maturation. The other boys saw this transition and learned this is how you become a man. Decades later, we're living with the consequences. Generations of men who learned from their earliest narrative blueprint that vulnerability must be eliminated, emotional range must be suppressed, wildness must be controlled or destroyed, difference must be amputated before it can be respected. Protection requires domination, growth requires loss. The tragedy isn't that Dragon Ball Z was violent or hypermasculine or popular. The tragedy is that it taught millions of people that the path to power requires cutting away the parts of yourself that connect you to cycles, ecology, and body vulnerability, to everything that makes power responsible. And even furthermore, I'd say everything that makes us human, you know? Like, fuck, you're wondering why all these, men are having issues, man. Maybe it's because we're literally not taught how to be human anymore. We're being taught the opposite, and that's not good for any gender, any, race, any culture, any creed. That's not good. That's the digital meta dystopia, like, it's not good. So, da da da. And they did this so smoothly, so entertainingly that most viewers never noticed the castration at all. They just learned to clench around the absence and call it maturity. This was my prophetic childhood perception, finally given the language it deserved, and for every other child who knew something was wrong, even if they couldn't yet name it. Just man, I know I didn't get that as good as the Rumpelstiltskin one. I got a little stutters, a little, the flow wasn't quite perfect. Got a little, slip ups here and there. And that was also just, the Claude wasn't as on point as it normally is. Normally it has great flow. I'm learning to love with the Claude because, ChatGPT for the baseline freaking little rough draft, Grok for the, extra additional information, even though fuck Grok and, Elon and all that stuff. I have very mixed feelings using it. I don't like it, but it's helpful, and I'm hopefully doing good, and hopefully, I don't know, that's I can't process that. I'm compartmentalizing it, but still, like, the whole freaking pedo thing with Grok, man, like, ugh. Like, I really have to be using this? Really? Ugh, gross. Fucked up, man. Yeah, don't even get me started on that. I'm getting off track. But This is where it's just freaking fascinating with the Dragon Ball Z and the Rumpelstiltskin, and going back and forth between the two. If you're seeing the how they contrast, it gets really fascinating, right? It starts going, okay, I see where this guy's coming from. Everyone is transgender. Everyone is performing in one way or another, even if they're not performing. Like this is an ontological state of existence, an ontological phenomenon. It's not some identity or ego thing. Like this is deeper, because frick, man, hypermasculinity, castration, like I have been saying for a few years, man, that these MAGA people, like, they seem to be compensating for something. They may have junk, but they spiritually they're sort of modern day eunuchs through with the hyper violent through a hyper violent lens, like I don't know, it's just interesting shit, man. People are interested, like existence is interesting, media is interesting, philosophy is interesting. Let's get interesting, people. Come on. Even this right here. This, I literally looked into this before I made this video, and I'm glad I did, because this is freaking hilariously ironic. So, this hat right here, I got this for like $5 a few years ago at Wally World, and I had a feeling right when I got it. I'm like, this is probably not even like, this is so knockoff. It's not even real. Even if it's licensed, it's one of those like licensed knockoffs, Because I just instantly looked at it. I'm like, this is probably not actually off the anime, and I haven't watched it yet. I've seen the images, but my memory's pretty good, and I'm pretty good at the semiotics and pattern recognition. I'm pretty sure this is not the same pattern. Pretty sure they just put a generic kanji on this. With the orange background. They went, hey, it's Dragon Ball Z, man. And that's where it's funny. The language and getting into it too, because this is branded Dragon Ball Z license, right? Okay, but it's literally never in any of the franchise's history. So it's not Dragon Ball, it's not Dragon Ball Z, but why did they choose Dragon Ball Z and not Dragon Ball, right? Exactly. Everybody, like in the English language, when people say Dragon Ball, like people don't know what the hell you're talking about. When you say Dragon Ball Z, everybody knows what you're talking about, and it's just it's duct tape versus duct tape. Like it's one of those blanket terms. Like because here in America, people really love to hate on freaking semantics, and they love their freaking 67s and their skibidis, and yeah, and I'm not even talking to younger generations or internet culture. I'm just talking American, anti-intellectualism. So, but that's some freaking ironic shit right there, man. Like, it's like, this isn't even Dragon Ball. It's not even Dragon Ball Z. It's just generic freaking random aesthetics that look like they fit the, genre. Like, they fit the media. And it's labeled Dragon Ball Z, not Dragon Ball. Like, Dragon Ball was the beginning, like it's. I suppose you could sort of make the same argument though with like Lord of the Rings or something. There's probably like somebody going like, well, why isn't the Hobbit like the first considered the beginning? Like why are we calling it the Hobbit? And it's like I don't know, freaking nay, man. The way humans put things into boxes and format into little systems, they're little pattern recognitions. It's interesting philosophically speaking, because yeah, I'm doing this with the deep diving into the the feminism and the masculinity and the transgender and all that stuff, but then I'm also deep diving into the language and the patterns and just I don't know. But anyway, this was my little freaking epiphany revelation deep dive thing into Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, because I've been watching the Dragon Ball series for like the past week, getting into that, and the second it got to him getting into the adult Goku stage, losing the tail, I'm just like, I knew this was gonna happen. I knew that even as an adult I was still gonna have that same knee-jerk reaction, that like, not that knee-jerk, but like deep to the core, like soul jerk reaction, like, and this is I'm obviously going deep here. This ain't an ego jerk, this is a little bit deeper, man. And yeah, so just freaking interesting, fascinating stuff. Like, I just am really having my mind boggled right now, contrasting this to the earlier, Rumpelstiltskin and Pinocchio one I just made. Because if you contrast these two, and I'm totally gonna get back into this, freaking get all the text from the, deep dive of the Rumpelstiltskin Pinocchio one, get all the deep dive text of the freaking Dragon Ball Z one, and have a trans-dualistic compare and contrast, through systems theory kind of thing. That'll be interesting. I'll get into that one in the near future. Because, yeah, the second I'm realizing that doing this video, I'm like, holy moly, like, no wonder I was excited about making this one too. Because it's like another side of the coin, it's another side, another perspective of the same freaking, like, human existence problem of like the human condition, not human existence. I mean it from like, the humanistic angle, not like the antinatalist misanthrope, push the red button, angle. I'm pushing it from the positive angle, not the negative angle. That's all I'm getting at right there. So anyway, though, just interesting, fascinating stuff. And I just can't get over just the irony that nobody has noticed that a franchise that hinges on hypermasculinity, the main character to transition to that hypermasculinity has to have castration, essentially. A castrated tail, that's just, like, what the flip, man? Like, I'm sure there's some freaking people that can take that from a completely different angle, man. There's some, like, Freudian, like, complete Dragon Ball Z freak that is just going to take this from a completely different perspective. And it's just, how's nobody gotten up on this yet? Like, with either the Rumpelstiltskin and Pinocchio or the Dragon Ball Z, how has nobody noticed this? Like, this is freaking deep and fascinating. Like, I'm laughing my ass off. I'm like, here I am, the agender kid with no friends in school and shit. Like, everybody tried to be friends with me. Everybody was friendly and stuff, but I didn't really have any friend groups. I didn't have a group of friends I hanged out with. I pretty much ended up hanging around, the girls and the gays, because it was like, I'm being called, and I'm being gender policed by the F word, by not the nice normal F word, the bigoted F word. I've been gender policed at that as just a small child. I instantly knew that I'm not a boy. I'm not welcome in the boys environment. And not welcome with the girls environment either. I have to be with the girls that hang out with the gays, and the gay, trans people all hanging together, and I'm hanging with them. So, but I just got a little ADHD there. Anyway, I was getting at is just that here I am, the young gender kid with like no friends, getting bullied and stuff, and I'm the healthiest freaking kid here. I'm the healthiest male on the playground, like, because I'm able to. Like, even if I'm not able to process this or articulate with language yet, I had that intuition, that drive that knew Dragon Ball is healthy for me, but Dragon Ball Z is not healthy for me. None of these other boys recognize that. Like, what's up with that? And it's just freaking interesting, man. Like I said, and you could take this from every different angle of the human condition problem when it comes to gender and identity, like, and just how we perform and how we live and function in this world, because like that's some sad stuff, man. I'm feeling really bad for all the men that learn the wrong lessons, man. I'm feeling really bad for them. I'm like, oh, and I'm also getting a little bit more empathy and understanding on why some people get sucked into the cult of this reactionary masculine movement, with all this crazy shit going on, I'm not a feminist, not by the modern terms, I'd say third wave, something like that, leaving off there, but diving deeper, more complex, but yeah, it's like I'm not a feminist by any modern means, because it's sort of like Christianity, If you're saying I'm a Christian, you basically are saying that you're, either a wasp or a fundy, Like, pretty much nobody interprets I'm a Christian as, like, I'm a universalist, or, like, it unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way yet when it comes to language, and now we're grouping things and where the world's moving, so, I don't know, it's just freaking fascinating, man. I'm going so fast, I'm just... Things are going over my head, I'm going so fast. So, I think I'm going to get going for now. This has been Sage DeForest, talking more about some crazy, interesting gender media, philosophical, metaphysical kind of shit, like. So, yeah, hope you enjoy. Sage DeForest over here on my channel, signing out.